is Michelle Bukowski, and I'm a mixed media reuse artist. Welcome to my studio. Today I'd like to share with you how I made this art journal layout. Art journaling has been part of my practice for the last 11 years. It's a place where I can play without worrying about finished products. It doesn't have to be good. It can just be something fun. I can throw some paint around. Sometimes it's a place where I develop techniques like the one I'm going to share with you today. And sometimes it actually does spark an idea for a whole painting series, and that's when it can be magical. I'd like to start you off with a creative warm-up using some old book pages and some water-soluble materials. We're going to make background papers that we're going to use in the layout. So if you'd like, pause the video now, read the list of materials we're going to use in the description below, gather up your materials and paint along with me, or you can just sit back and watch, and we'll get started. All right, so we're going to start with our creative warm-up. I'm going to use some old book pages I have left over from a previous project. If you didn't have a book or you're not comfortable tearing up a book, you could look, maybe you've got an old planner, that would work. Maybe you have scrapbook paper, that would definitely work. Worst case, you could always just use some plain copy paper, notebook paper, any kind of paper you have will work for this. All right, so we're going to do some prep. So we're using acrylic gesso for our base. Gesso is a primer. It's going to give this kind of flimsy paper enough tooth to take wet mediums that we're going to be using. So I'm going to put some on my paper. I have a Catalyst tool by Princeton. If you don't have one of these, don't worry. You can use one of these, a gift card. Gift cards work just as well. And I'm sure you have plenty of them laying around your house, especially after the holidays. So I suggest when you sit down to do this, you prep a bunch of pages like I have. Or if you want, you can use a heat tool, which we're going to use here in a little bit anyhow. All right, so I have a bunch of pages. I have some different sizes. And we're going to start with some light colors with these Neo pastels. These are Neo Color water-soluble wax pastels. They activate with water. So you're going to want to scribble it on. It's a lot of mindfulness going on here too. It's very relaxing practice. But see, I'm trying to get a lot of this pigment down. So we're going to take our brush with a lot of water and we're just going to start moving this pigment around. And mix the colors because that's where some of the real fun happens. But you want to make sure that you're not seeing the scratch marks of when you put the color down, right? So you want to get it nice and blended where you can kind of see the book pages underneath. All right, see, there's no marks in it. You can see all of the pigments moving. And now we're going to take our heat tool to it, and here's where the fun comes in. So I sped this part up because while it's a lot of fun to do, it's not as much fun to watch in real time. But you can see here that I'm picking up the page, I'm moving it around, I'm moving the heat tool around, and some really cool effects are starting to emerge. All right, so it's almost dry. You can see a little bit of wet still in there, but look at all these great little effects going on here. Isn't that pretty? So you can sit and make pages like this all day, but what if you don't have the Neo colors? I have two other options for you. Acrylic inks. So it's the same process. You're going to put down some acrylic ink. You're going to add a lot of water, get it moving around on the paper, and then use your heat tool. And you get a pretty similar effect. And your third option is watercolor. As you can see, I grabbed a palette and selected a couple of colors. And it's, again, same technique. You're adding a lot of water, a lot of pigment, and your heat tool. And you get a very similar effect with the watercolor. I was actually pretty pleased with the way it turned out. we have options now, right? So if you make a bunch, so we've got, this is the watercolor, water soluble. Look at all of that. And then these I did with the acrylic inks. And here are some with the watercolors. All right, so now that we've done all of this, we are ready to start on our art journal page. All right, now to the journal layout. So you could use any number of journals. So you could use a journal like this, which has got nice thick paper, which is made for wet medium. Or maybe you have one of these Coptic bound journals. Maybe you use it for watercolor, and it's also, again, got thick paper. But just to show you that art journaling is for everybody, and it should be accessible to everybody, I'm using an old journal of mine. And look, it's a composition book, right? So thin pages, which means we are going to start with paper and gesso to build up the background. Kind of like this. Now, another reason why I like to start with paper and gesso is because sometimes it helps me with my color palette if I don't already have a focal element. But today, I do have a focal element, and I have picked papers to use around it, and I think this kind of is inspiring me today. I'm loving this color and the clock, and I also found this piece, so I'm thinking that I might use the trees because I always love the forest. These colors go with it, ties in the colors here. So I think this is what we're going to start with. These are going to be our focal elements. But to start with, I also made a color copy of this. So I'm going to use my favorite Uhu Glue Stick for some of this, and I might use some matte medium as well, but we'll see. All right, so the first part is to get something down on the page, because lots of people have trouble with blank pages. So now we no longer have a blank page. All right. Don't skip that part either, because sometimes you can stare at a blank page and it can be really intimidating for artists that have been doing this for a really long time and for beginners. So just go ahead and get something. It doesn't have to be graphite. It can be a marker. You could start with some marks, right? But start with something. So we're going to just tear up some pieces, building up the background, building up the paper, because remember, not super strong paper. Won't take a lot of wet medium if we don't have something to help hold it. And notice I'm not really overthinking where I'm putting stuff. This is a piece from another project. And I'm going to add it in here. I think I'm liking this winter scene a bit. So you can even use magazine images in the background. You may or may not see that at the end. I'm gonna balance out a little bit maybe here. And let's get some darks in here. I know it seems random where I'm placing things, and it is a little bit random, but I'm thinking about when I start covering this up where I'm going to be putting my focal element, and it's going to be on this side. We're going to do to make this more negative space, but I do like this, and I think I'm going to use some inks flowing over here to balance it out. Because while it's going to be mostly negative space, meaning your eye should go to this focal element, we still need a little something so that your eye kind of travels around the piece. So this is a bit on the intuitive side, but it also takes a little bit of planning if you want, or you could go completely intuitive. All up to you. All right, so we've got our hot mess background layer, and I know what you're thinking. How is this going to ever turn into anything that looks like anything? So we're gonna start with some gesso, kind of tone it down a little bit, and take my catalyst tool, just kind of start blending some of that in. And some of this is going to get completely covered up, and that's fine. Some of it, I want to let it peek out a little bit. It might end up getting covered up at the very end, and that's also fine. Remember, background, it's just our first layer. It's just helping us get started. But it is also adding some nice texture. This is a great exercise in not letting anything be precious. If you've ever heard anybody talking about that in their paintings or in their art journals, sometimes what can hold you back is when you like a little tiny piece of a painting, but it doesn't serve the rest of the painting well, but you keep trying to hold on to it because you love the effect it did and you're not sure how you made it, and what if you can never do it again? That's being really precious, and sometimes it can keep you from finishing your painting. So this is a really good place for me to kind of let go of that. Maybe it's a precious piece of paper that I've been holding on to, or again, maybe I figured out by accident a cool technique that left a really cool effect, but I don't know how I'm going to do it, so I want to keep it, but it doesn't serve the overall vision that I have. Right now, see how this is much more uniform than it was before I added that layer of gesso. All right, so we're going to go ahead and hit it up with the heat tool. For our third layer, we're going to add in some of this background papers. And again, this is another intuitive kind of exercise. I'm just going to move around the pieces, different sizes and different placements to see what feels the best and where I think it's going to serve that focal element the best. I'm going to use the matte medium for this. So when you're applying matte medium, you want to put it on both surfaces and then over the top. Now, notice that it's smearing, right? Because I'm using water-soluble materials with essentially water-soluble medium. And also, this wasn't completely dry, so I probably picked up some pieces of gesso, which is all fine to me. Because this is just for fun. Can you see though how even while it's a bit of a mess and it's still a lot, like this, we will tone this way down, but can you see now that while it's smeared a little bit, right, it does look like it's actually part of the page. It's kind of pushing it back. It's not just sitting on top. And that's the thing. We want to keep building these layers to unify the finished piece. And by doing that while it's wet and smearing a little bit of that medium, can you see that right there? Right? It looks like it's supposed to be there. It's part of the page. So next layer, now we're going to take some matte acrylic in white. Now this is acrylic and not gesso, so it's going to, you're not going to see through it. And I'm going to add just a touch of this Paynes gray, and this is a pretty dark color, so we're going to add just a little bit. Just a very little bit. I'm going to use a brush and tint this white a little bit. And just come back in and start. See, I do want to get rid of the pole, but I want the little bit of trees to come out. I want to get rid of the matte, and I definitely want that to blend in better. So I buy my brushes at the reuse center because I am very rough on them, as you can see. Okay, so see, now we've got little bits peeking through. Everything's kind of soft. So you've got some nice textures going here, right? Everything's pushed back. This is still pretty dominant. This is still pretty dominant. So this might need another go through, but we'll see. Now it's time to get that focal element out. And do we want, see, originally I thought I might use some of that. That might be too bright. I've got those winter trees. I think I still might use some of this. All right, so this, I love this, and I'm making it precious, so here we go. I mean, I don't want to just be completely willy-nilly and completely mess up my piece, but I am being way too precious. All right, so we've got a focal element, and I do like this flooring, so I might keep a bit of that. All right. All right, so I think I'm gonna keep a bit of that flooring because I like how that ties that in. I'm probably gonna take a little bit off. Maybe do something like that. So ultimately I decided that while I liked the trees, they were too bright. Even the darker pieces, they just didn't go, and the wintry pieces that were showing through were a much better fit. See how that's starting? Because it's still a little wet. Now it's starting to look like it's part of the page. Right? Okay. right, but we're gonna need to blend that in much better. All right, and you'll notice that this is wrinkling. This is wrinkling because I'm using thin paper. If I were using this paper, which is much thicker, you see, this is all wet. It wouldn't wrinkle, right? And that's fine. This doesn't bother me. Just know that it will wrinkle because you're using wet medium on paper. All right. So we're gonna play with this a little bit because it's too like in your face. We're gonna push it back a little bit. So we're gonna use this and a little bit of that again. I'm going to introduce a little bit of green. This is Chromium Oxide green because we've got that pretty color in there, and I want to introduce a little bit of that. All right. So just a little bit. Right? Might be too much. All right. Can you see the difference? Hmm? I'm going to use the acrylic inks again on this one. And I'm really digging this Indigo. And I'm also going to come in with a little bit of sap green, which is one of my favorites as well. So we're going to go up at the top here. I've got a spray bottle of water. All right, and so I know I said not to make this precious, but I don't want it on right on there. That's great, actually. That's not. So I'm going to add a little of that indigo to the bottom there. But first, cap your lid. Always remember to cap your lid. I have definitely knocked over a bottle or two of acrylic ink because I was in a big hurry and I didn't put the lid back on. So some more white acrylic ink and some more of that indigo, a little more water and some spray bottle. It's kind of a balancing act at this point. It's a wet medium, so it kind of has a mind of its own. It's not going to do exactly what I want it to do, and that's actually part of the fun. So it's a little bit of back and forth, as you'll see. So blotting out some of that indigo ink there on the left side wasn't doing it. It still feels too heavy. It's taking away the focal point, which is the clock and the door on the right. So going back and adding in this white paint and kind of starting over and kind of reworking this section should tone it down a bit and maybe give me more of what I'm looking for. A little bit of white. that up. There we go. We want to go this way this time. And I am going to take that out just a little. All right, so you got some cool effects going here. I still need to darken that up just a bit. Can you see how going back and forth though has created all these really cool effects? And you can see a little bit of the papers that we started with, but a lot of it's gone, and that's fine. There we go. All right, and so I was looking around and remembered that I had this little jar. You can tell when you're having a good day in the studio when your hands are painty. Anyhow, I have this little jar of words that I've cut out of book pages. And I thought a little found poetry might be nice. And I'm going to do it down in this corner. Now this I am going to use, actually I take that back, I'm going to use matte medium for this. I'm going to use glue stick underneath and matte medium on top. They had something marvelous. Relentlessly optimistic. Love and peace. All that was romantic and exciting. Okay, and now I'm going to use a Stabilo All pencil and just kind of, you'll see what this is. I'm going to do here in just a second. I'm going to come in with a little bit of matte medium. Just to seal it and make it part of the page. See how that is smearing? And now it's not sitting on top of it, it's part of it. But you can't do it down here. Without doing a little up here. All right. Well, I think this is it. So, what do you think? Pretty intuitive. We used all the pieces and elements that we talked about. Still a little wet, but I'm going to do a close-up for you here in just a second. All right, so here's our finished layout. And here's some close-ups. All that great texture. Look, we've got piece from the very first layer, Got some pieces for when we laid down our focal element. We'll come back over here. All that ink, drippy ink. There's our focal element. There's our poem. They had something marvelous, relentlessly optimistic. Love and peace, all that was romantic and exciting. And all that great texture. All right, so there we go. One more time. And here are all the materials that we used today. I will list them in the description below. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment and I'll make sure to follow up. Bye.